love space and we love to connect with society. So that's the reason why at IAF we have formed a committee on the social cultural utilization of space. You ready? Okay. Okay. And this committee is sponsoring this session that is organized by IFE from Lindenthal. And I want to advertise that if you're interested by this aspect of the activity of the IF, we have a committee meeting that will take place on Thursday at 5 o'clock in room 146. So we are all open, and if you have ideas how to connect between space, arts, and society, join the ITACCUS committee. Now it's my pleasure to introduce IFE from Lindenthal.
Do you want to come? Join. Welcome everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to start by thanking the IAF and the IAC for having us today. This session, as Bernard said, is sponsored by ITACCUS, which is the International Committee for the Cultural Utilisation of Space. And we are a committee that really looks at what can be done in space other than the usual science and engineering and commercial enterprises. And we do this in several ways. We do this by endorsing projects. We do this by being a resource for those who want to also do similar projects. We advise people, we facilitate projects, and we do all kinds of outreach. So if you're interested, come and talk to us afterwards. I'd like to start by, I'm very sorry, I do have to grab something for one moment. I do apologize very deeply, but give me 1 second.
She's coming back. She's alive. Don't worry.
In the meantime, ladies will perform a ballet.
So there is no singing involved in this session, I should say. But the first question for you all is, are you alive? Do we have any form of living soul here in this audience? Yes, here we go. So this is going to happen very soon as IFA is coming back. Anyway, we are delighted to be able to share with you some thoughts that we had around the topic of alive in space. And I'm sure IFA will tell you more, but everybody here on this panel will be sharing some of their viewpoints as to which methodologies from their area of expertise we should bring in outer space whenever we consider explorations. And here she comes, and voila.
Thank you, Nelly. So let me just introduce you a little bit to myself and the rest of the team. Do you have the clicker?
No.
Oh, okay. Could you help find it for me? Is it just there? Let me introduce everyone to start with. So, my name's Aoife van Lindenthal. I'm a multidisciplinary artist, and I'm the director of Feral, an arts and events organization, which tunes into the wild and beautiful instincts of the human condition. Beginning in the year 2000, my work with explosive fuses my interest in nature, cosmology, chemistry, and physics. I'm a multidisciplinary artist. My practice spans sculpture, installation, drawing, photography, film, and performance. I create abstract, visceral, and immersive works which often examine concepts of time, density, matter, as well as deep human emotions and motivations. I like to step into the unknown and draw the value out of the chaos. I graduated from both St. Martin's College of Art and Design and the International School for Safety and Explosive Engineers with a qualification in explosive handling in 2002. I was artist in residence at the European Space Agency and Ars Electronica in 2007, and some of my other roles include Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and the Vice Chair of the IAF Committee for the Cultural Utilisation of Space. The first question I want to ask is, what makes you feel alive to the audience? I'm going to ask each one by one as I introduce them, and then afterwards I'm going to also ask you in the audience what makes you feel alive. So have a little think about that while you're listening to the others. So first of all, we have Sitraka Rakotonanya. Sitraka was born in Madagascar. He grew up in Paris and then moved to London in 2008 to study at the Royal College of Art in the Design Interactions program. His interests lie in speculative design and storytelling. He crafts future narratives through designed artifacts and the use of these as a form of storytelling to probe, questions, or excite. He uses science as a fuel to imagine new relationships between people and technology, whether it allows us to achieve something fantastic or perceive reality differently. Sitraka, what makes you feel truly alive?
If we talk about alive in the sense of like what keeps me going and doing projects, I would imagine, what keeps me alive is like I stay alive through my projects. It's to some extent the kind of tiny transformations that my practice as a kind of designer, artist, or educator sometimes actually brings. Is from a project perspective, it's also this kind of the idea of using design as a way of creating questions or open questions as opposed to provide narrow answers, and that's what keeps me alive.
Thank you. Michael Garrett. Professor Michael Garrett is the inaugural Sir Bernard Lavelle Chair of Astrophysics at the University of Manchester and Director of Jodrell Bank Centre for Astrophysics. He's a former Director of Jive Astronomy. Garrett's research interests abroad with his own work focused on high-resolution radio observations of the distant universe. He has published more than 150 refereed papers on this and related topics. He's deeply interested in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence and is the Vice Chair of the IAA SETI Permanent Committee. He serves on numerous related scientific advisory boards, including those of SETI Institute and Breakthrough Listen. Michael, what makes you feel alive? And by the way, this can be a really personal question. It doesn't have to be anything to do with your work. It doesn't have to be anything to do with your research.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I think professionally, one of the things that makes me feel alive is when you make a discovery. It doesn't have to be a big discovery. It might be a very small discovery. When you do something that you think maybe no one else has ever done before, or no one else has ever seen this, or you've done something that other people thought couldn't be done. It's kind of a mini eureka moment. So for me, that makes me really feel alive. Another thing that makes me feel alive is working with young people, especially sort of young undergraduate students and graduate students, and seeing their enthusiasm, seeing how good they are. I never understand people who think that the younger generation is somehow less able than the current or previous generations. That's absolutely not my experience. So I get a lot of enthusiasm from working with young people. And personally, I feel alive when I'm with my daughters. I have 3 daughters, and I feel alive when I meet them, which is a very happy moment. But I also feel alive when I have to go away from them, and I feel sad, very sad sometimes. So those are the kind of things that make me feel alive.
Great. And then next we have the wonderful Dr. Nenibel Haywan Stepania. She's a designer of extreme experiences that aims to bring the sublime to life, an award-winning designer and filmmaker who creates multi-dimensional experiential projects at the intersection of science, theater, politics, and design. She's the founder and director of the International Space Orchestra, the world's first orchestra of NASA, space scientists, and astronauts. She founded the University of the Underground, a tuition-free school that is focusing on empowering countercultures in institutions and advocating pluralistic thinking and transnational education. She's the author and director of 3 feature-length documentaries on space exploration and investigating the production of knowledge. Her various roles include designer of experience at the SETI Institute, advisor to the United Nations Virtual Reality Labs, an associate fellow at the Hannah Arendt Center for Politics and Humanities at Bard College. Nelly, what really makes you feel alive? Really?
So what makes me feel alive? Well, you know, this room makes me feel alive. I mean, you're surely sharing a lot of energy on this stage. But no, I mean, seriously, what makes me feel alive? I mean, curiosity, I guess, probably like all of you, makes me feel alive. I think this is one of the main, you know, fuel for space exploration in any case. But I think if you were to come back to what we might want to bring in outer space when we consider space exploration and space, you know, and, you know, perhaps the future of humanity in space, I would say the action of thinking, right? The idea that we are able to think, but to also action our thoughts, and that we, you know, and we are able to produce knowledge. That is something that to me is, you know, what perhaps we can discuss in more length afterwards, but like the action of thinking is something that to me is at the core of what, you know, makes us human.
And then we have Bernard. Bernard Foying is the chief scientist, thank you Nelly, by the way, chief scientist at European Space Agency, executive director of the International Lunar Exploration Working Group. He was a principal project scientist for Smart 1, the first European mission to the moon. He's also an organic chemist for Mars Express and co-investigator of the Mars Express high-resolution stereo camophore? Yeah? The Mars Express orbiter. Some of his other roles include advisor to ESA Director General Moon Village Collaboration's Young Professional Training. He's the chair of ITACCUS, and for good reason. He's a tour de force in facilitating arts, humanities, and space projects, connecting people and supporting many space-themed artistic projects. He works in collaboration with Elizaveta Glukova and Anna Sitnikova in developing and realizing Moon Gallery, launching 100 artifacts to the moon. So simply, Bernard, what makes you feel alive?
Oh, feeling alive is, personally, I'm not going to tell everything, but that's about, yes, love, family, friends, science, discovery, music. But from the professional side, I thought your question was also how I feel alive in space. And that's how space is flowing through us. From the universe from where we are born. We are, you know, children of the Big Bang, of the core of stars. This is flowing through us. And this I discovered much later. As a kid, I went outside in the field with my girlfriend and other friends. We watched the stars. And this was really amazing to see the universe through your eyes. All the time we had the chance, I was in Chile, in the Atacama Desert. You had this beautiful Milky Way. And then I had a chance to work as an astronomer and as a space scientist. So using telescopes and building instruments that are going to space to observe the universe. And more recently, instruments that visit the moon, Mars, other destinations. And also, I have to confess that I'm alive in the sense that I gave back to the universe a bit of me. I had a little baby, a robotic spacecraft we sent to the moon. I touch it with my hands. Some of my DNA print is on it, and a bit of it is on the moon. We should figure out with the rover if it's still alive. But I think that in any case, the next step will be to go with all of you in a village, with the whole community, and be alive on our Earth moon, and then live there and expand life there.
So basically what makes you alive is to have contaminated the moon with your DNA.
Well, that's the destiny of life is to expand. That's why life developed. And, but we have to do it.
That's one aspect of
we
it.
have to do it responsibly. I think that if there were some organism on the moon, or it's the case on Mars, we should be very careful. We have to respect other lives.
So the moon is fine, but Mars no. But this is okay.
Legally it is.
Okay. And then from my own perspective, what makes me feel most alive is dancing. When I'm dancing, I feel completely connected to everything, relaxed, all my stresses disappear. I can dance on stage in front of 20,000 people. I could be dancing at a family with my little nephew. And when I dance with other people and I see how they dance and how they move and express themselves, it makes me feel like I'm connected to them, and it makes me feel like I know them better, and I really thrive off that. So that's my personal one. Now I want to go out to the audience. Anyone want to just tell us what makes you feel alive? It's very simple. Failing. Take the mic, tell us why.
I like failing because then you find something that's worth your effort, because then you can like succeed at it knowing that you were failing before. It means that you actually accomplished something that you didn't have a capability for before.
And I think the interesting thing about failing is that in order to fail, you've had to have tried something that you never tried before.
Exactly.
So anyone else?
Thank you.
At the back. We'll come to you. Yeah.
I would say debating. So I think to me, like, that kind of process of discussing things with different people can be super emotional. So whether you're arguing with someone about a scientific topic, or you're trying to make a breakthrough with your friends on...
Can we turn the mic up a little bit? Because I can't hear very well. Can you hear?
Maybe I just need to hold it closer.
There is a strange echo from the moon.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think that's better.
Okay. I said debating, because I think that can be a really emotional process, whether it's like arguing a belief of yours, or if it's a good emotion and you're talking with friends and getting really enlightened about their perspective. That's what makes me feel alive.
That's great. And it's very difficult as well, because you're often debating with people who have the total opposite idea. You get very heated, as you said, and learning to manage that and actually try to progress between you is difficult. So I can see why that's... Anyone else? We'll take one more.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes?
Personally, my wife and my family keep me alive when I'm with them. But from a professional standpoint, a bit like Michael, enthusiastic students. Enthusiastic students that are anxious to learn. Not only what I have to teach, but what anyone has to teach.
That's really nice, and I think there's a sense of naivety and not being too cool. You know, sometimes people are too cool for school and they're not enthusiastic anymore. They try and play everything down. That sense of enthusiasm is so important to carry through, I think. And we asked this question about being alive because what does it mean to be alive as opposed to living? The value and meaning of human life is a paradox, one which is providing further fascination in the context of space exploration, as the playground for human culture extends into the stars. So we're just going to discuss a little bit more about the panelists' methodologies and their work, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the IAA and IAF recommendations, which outline how space flight organizations can further the development of human culture within their mission objectives. And we want to challenge you as well, the audience, to understand your role in this development and ask you how you will contribute to the meaning of life in space. So, Sitraka, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your work and maybe a little bit about critical thinking and critical design? You can use some examples as well.
Sure. So, my work in general, I'm a designer who's interested in storytelling and a thing that has been known as speculative design, which is the idea of literally use design as a medium to probe questions rather than providing very narrow solutions. And also it's more about exploring multiple perspectives rather than pursuing eventually a particular direction with narrow goggles or preventing tunnel vision, basically. It's also the idea of like using critical design as a backbone and critical thinking by extension, in the sense that, an example that I often use is like my work is often interested in when you have someone who's like telling you that they're working towards the greater good or to enable a better tomorrow, usually what I start doing is questioning the meaning behind greater good and better tomorrow for whom. And that's the origin of the design practice. And so in 2015, I started a project called, which is a public-facing research project called Very, Very Far Away, which is looking at the democratization of future narratives. And the idea that future is a narrative construct, and it starts first by creating a fiction where everyone can actually project themselves into that. Unfortunately, amongst the people who are actually kind of like enabling the future, often you found something that is quite monocultural and not necessarily inclusive in many ways. And it's kind of like the idea of the project was not necessarily to provide solutions to that, but eventually to voice a little bit different kind of collective aspirations and see how we can think differently about things, not necessarily follow the normalized narratives. This picture that you see there is actually a picture from a workshop that I was running with Joseph Popa, which was sitting on the front row, with a design school in Geneva, an art and design school. So we're very, very far away. We work, I mean, VVFA, we work with lots of institutions, whether they're cultural institutions, colleges, private institutions as well, run workshops with corporations and et cetera. But this particular project was about reimagining outer space and how you perceive yourself, because in lots of time people feel very passive and therefore they don't even project themselves into these futures. So how can you be thinking and engaging with the future if you can't even project yourself in these places? And this particular idea that we did, I mean, on this particular image, is we asked the students to actually use cardboard to kind of like create a helmet as a characterization of the type of people they think would be eventually in different places, the moon base, like a Mars colony, a spacecraft, on the kind of one-way ticket journey of 100 years and etc. And the things that are very interesting and I found really interesting and that are actually very little discussed are all the human aspects of space exploration and the consequences that it has on people's perception, in the sense that all the themes that we came up with these students about is like loneliness, isolation. I mean, there was also other things that were much more cheerful, but it's like kind of like themes that are at the end of the day very human, and yeah, and kind of like more shared and democratized in some ways as narratives.
Thank you. And you talked a little bit before about cultural colonialism and that kind of thing. Is that related to, how is that related to what is it and how does it relate to what you're saying? Did everyone hear that? Sorry.
Well, the thing was, I mean, I know it's kind of, I find it quite interesting because obviously, I'm originally from Madagascar, which used to be a French colony. And I immigrated to France, and then I moved to London, and I've been living in London for like 11 years or something. And something that is interesting to me in terms of like, I mean, I'm just going to tell you about my personal experience, not necessarily about colonization as such, but in terms of like representation as an individual with multiple identities, in the sense that if I go back to Madagascar now, like, I don't speak the language, nor I know the customs. If I'm in France, like I grew up in France, and it was the 1990s, and it was quite interesting because nobody identified me as a French person. And they were always asking, yeah, but actually, where are you from? And now that I moved to London, people are talking to me as if, like, asking me, oh, so you're French, because you speak eventually with a French accent, and etc. And it's an interesting thing, because then they expect me to know things about, like, wine, cheese, and stuff like that.
And
But
then in terms of space, how does that relevant to the image of space? You were kind of touching on it before, but just to clarify for the audience.
In terms of democratization of that.
Yeah, the kind of, you were talking about the imagining yourself and...
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, there's one exercise that I do often in my workshop, which is really, it sounds really silly, but actually that's the main purpose. Usually you start by doing silly things and you have meaningful realization afterwards. But what we do is often we play music for like 3 or 5 minutes and ask the participants to actually write a story, like not write a story, but to imagine themselves or to imagine a situation in space in future, like how does that work and etc. And I want them to be as detailed as possible, but it's not a story, it's more like just describing a scene. And what happens after that description and those things is interesting. Is I ask them the question, so who was your main protagonist? And often the main protagonist is not them. And I work with people from different backgrounds as well, like not only I work in different places around the world. But the outcome of this conversation every single time is like they often imagine a white male within a Western city or Western spacecraft, like kind of Western culture. And when we do that, it's a kind of interesting outcome, because then if we think about this kind of like idea of space and this collaborative environment that is international, then it's sad that they can't even like project themselves as being part of it.
So it's so ingrained, this stereotype, that even people from a different background still even have that stereotype themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
That's super interesting. Well, we'll come back to that in a minute. Let's go to Michael. Michael, a big part of your work with SETI is directing the search for extraterrestrial intelligent life forms at Jodrell Bank Center for Astrophysics. Tell us more about that, and just a little bit about why you think this desire to communicate with other unknown beings is so strong.
Yeah, so my day job is as an astronomer and an astrophysicist, looking after a big university department, but also looking after a large telescope at Jodrell Bank, the Lovell telescope, which you see on the screen at the moment. It also hosts another big organization called the Square Kilometre Array. The headquarters is there at Jodrell Bank in the UK. I first became interested in the idea of being able to think about life outside of this planet, I think, when I was quite young. I read Carl Sagan's book on, I think it's called Blue Earth, or Blue Dot. It's a really small one. It was only about that thick, so I think I was 10 years old, and I could kind of consume it quickly and understand a lot about it. And it just absolutely intrigued me, the idea that there might be, other people or beings, intelligent civilizations out there. And just that brings up so many interesting questions about, what would they look like? How would they talk? Would they believe in God? Would they have many gods? Would they love each other? Would they be having wars? I mean, just the whole thing just absolutely kind of still blows my mind, the idea that there could be other civilizations out there, and they might be really very different from what we are and the way we are. So that's been one of the things that has really driven me over certainly the last 10 years, is trying to think of ways that we can detect the signature of those civilizations, in particular the hope that one might be able to detect their technology. So if they're communicating, for example, with each other, they might be communicating using radio waves or optical lasers or all sorts of different possibilities. And so I've been really sort of focused on thinking about how we can do that much better than we've done it before.
Thank you. And if we want to communicate with an extraterrestrial intelligent life form, I always imagine, playing a game where people make a mask. They imagine you were inventing your own alien, and each alien had its own rules of how it could communicate, and you put two of them together. How do they figure out anything? How do they actually manage to have a conversation? And if we think about that from your perspective and the work that you're doing, what do you need from society in order to prepare for that? Wider society and not just the science.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the great problems with looking for other civilizations, intelligent civilizations, is that we absolutely have no idea what it is that we're looking for. It could be something similar to us, but probably it's not. Probably it's something quite different. They will certainly be at another phase in their evolutionary life. They'll probably be much, 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 much more advanced than we are. And so that's why I think it's really important that we get input from every possible place and every possible idea and perspective, so that we go into this business with the widest possible perspective.
Because otherwise we're kind of, we have this stereotypical image of, in the movies or, you know, on television, that if an alien life form was to approach the Earth, or we were to connect with it, that there'd be this huge international emergency with all the governments and all the military and all the, you know, secret, it would all be secret. But is that the right way to go about it? What do you think?
Well, I think if they were really physically visiting, yeah, that would be pretty scary at some level, right? Everything that's foreign or you don't know about is always a little bit difficult. But if it's just the fact that we know they're out there, you know, we pick up their internet transmissions or something like that, and we understand what kind of, we can decode those and we can understand what culture they have. Personally, I think humanity would be able to cope with that quite well. You know, people say, oh, well, this could have so many problems for different religious organizations, you know, if we discovered extraterrestrial life. And I'm absolutely sure that nearly all the religions would cope with that quite fine. You know, they'd soon adopt the idea that there are other sort of intelligent civilizations out there. So I think the impact could be big in areas of, you know, culture and trying to understand their music and, you know, the literature that they have and all that. I mean, just like it's, you know, it's just amazing that you would find a completely new and different culture to go and explore.
And SETI does actually incorporate different, a whole range of people from society in working on this problem. And how are you successful at that? Because it's quite rare in a scientific institute for that to happen so easily and freely. How do you manage that? How do you recruit everybody?
Just to be clear, Michael Garrett is not at the SETI Institute, as far as I'm aware. You are? You're not? No. No, so it's a different thing, right? So the SETI Institute was co-created by Carl Sagan and Jill Tarter and many other, Frank Drake, and, you know, in 1984 or 86 maybe. And Michael is running the Jodrell Bank Observatory, which is also specialized in looking for extraterrestrial signal. So it's two different things. SETI Institute now is doing, you know, SETI research. So what basically Garrett is doing, looking for, you know, signal coming from outer space, but also looking for signature life forms on other planets. So that's called astrobiology. So we have these two kind of key pillars into the institute. But yeah.
Perfect.
I mean, I think it's an interesting point, and it's just one of those questions that everyone wants to know the answer to, just about. And it's also a question where, you know, there's no such thing as an expert, because we don't know if life is out there. We don't know what the signals are going to look like. So everybody's opinion in this room at this point in time about intelligent life in the universe, one is not more valid than the other. They're all valid. And I think that there's a sort of an ownership amongst all people to have an opinion about these kind of topics.
Thank you. And Nelly, your work, you've just premiered a film which tracks your journey on the pursuit of knowledge.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that. What did you find?
Maybe you can show like an image which is actually quite monstrous of that film. Oh, that's actually, maybe you can go back, maybe you can explain before. That's Jodrell Bank as well. Before, just the one before. No, that's this one. Do you want, like, maybe it would be good to know what is this?
Okay, so one of the things we have at Jodrell Bank is every year in the summer, in July, we have a festival. It's sort of a mixture of science, but I mean most of it's music and lots of talks, scientific talks, but also in other subject areas, and some great bands there as well, and we use the telescope. We project onto the telescope. So about 20,000, 25,000 people come there every year. It's called Blue Dot. And it's really taken off. People really love this combination of science and society and people that have an interest in the universe and, you know, SETI and all those different things.
Thank you.
And then maybe I can now, here we go. So this is quite early work. So basically I run a studio called Nelly Belen Studios, which is based in the UK. It's celebrating its 10 years anniversary this year, so it's quite a big milestone for us. We design experience, and the idea is to give you the experience of a rocket liftoff straight from your living room all the way to generating dark energy in your kitchen sink while neutrinos are erupting in your bathtub. And so for a while, I used to be the creative director of a nightclub in London called Shunt, where I was able to basically test a lot of these ideas, but also get involved a lot of scientists. So, you know, every night, basically 3 nights, we will be running some scientific experiments that will also be experiences for members of the public. So in this case, this is if you know about the Super Kamioken Day in Japan, it's a big neutrino observatory, which is, you know, in a mountain over there. And so we got some of the scientists of the Super Kamioken Day in Japan to come in the nightclub and kind of share the mystery around, you know, the universe, but specifically neutrinos and what happens when 2 neutrinos meet with each other inside one of these tunnels. And then that led me into developing a project called the International Space Orchestra, which is this orchestra at NASA Ames Research Center, where, you know, you have all of the different managers at NASA, including the head of NASA at the time was Pete Worden, who was playing, you know, the gong. And so since 2012, every year, the orchestra kind of meet and we define a new topic, a new subject, but we also work with established artists like Beck, Bobby Womack, Damon Albarn, others, and we sing in all different languages. So they've been singing in Arab, they've been singing in Icelandic. It's in a way, at this point in time in history where, you know, we obviously have there is obviously the Trump administration in place. I think the International Space Orchestra is really a key. It's a very important platform, at least for the scientists there, to also reflect as to what are they doing in an agency that is a federal agency. What is their mission? How do we move from being about exploring space to, kind of supporting space, Space Force or and other kind of military actions, and having that kind of conversation basically while you're playing the dobro and I'm playing the trumpet might be actually. Maybe the best way to actually discuss these quite hot topics or quite complex topics and discussions, of course.
I think this is really interesting because it's kind of one of the key roles of an artist to, we quite often step into a situation such as the space industry and we create something quite fun. And this is something quite fun that everybody can get involved with. They feel safe. In some ways it's very groundbreaking, but you're also, there's a pretense. And there's a kind of deeper motivation, Nelly, which is what you're kind of getting at, which is you use this as a conduit to really get down to business, which is what you're talking about, the kind of really opening people up and making them get back in contact with their true pursuit and the real reason why they got into this work in the first place.
And then maybe moving forward with the movie that you mentioned. So I've just released a movie last week, which is called I Am Not a Monster. Which is a documentary, basically, where I basically go through the pursuit of the origin of knowledge. And I think specifically when we are thinking about, our future in space, knowledge, the action of thinking, kind of what is the origin of that? Where does it all start? Whether it started with Lucy and us becoming bipedal, like the idea that when we become bipedal, then suddenly the brain starts to develop and then we are able to think and develop critical thinking, all the way to, and in this film, basically I'm impersonating this political theorist called Hannah Arendt. I don't know if you know about Hannah Arendt, but she died in 1975. And she was a political theorist that was a big advocate for plurality and pluralistic thinking. That was really her thing. So the idea that you don't just think with one mindset, but you are able to actually see every single different viewpoints. And what she was advocating for, she wrote this book called The Origin of Totalitarianism, which is now a big bestseller since the Trump election. And you know, he basically kind of go back to the core of what she thinks will avoid us to go back into totalitarianism regime. And what she's saying is the idea that at this point in time in history, what we are doing is basically kind of like making of the other that we don't agree with a monster. So, you know, I don't agree with Mike Pence, or I don't agree with Trump, so he's a monster. I'm never going to be in the same room as this person, and I'm just going to just eradicate him from my life. Or I will just, you know, like, and kind of, he's a monster. But actually what she's saying here is the idea that by doing so, you just reinforce ideology. We need to be able to define platforms in which we are able to all have, you know, a discussion where we are able to also hear viewpoints that are not our ones, and we need to be able to actually build this platform. And for me, at least in my practice, it's about building educative structures. So I created a university, the University of the Underground, where we invite everyone to come on the table. And that means people that we agree with, I mean people that we don't agree with. But the core for us is really to endorse this notion of plurality and pluralistic thinking. And I think it's very important as well that, you know, with the IAC and what we are doing here, whenever we discuss about space exploration, perhaps it would be a good time to also invite, you know, historians. You know, we are, after all, we are having a congress which is about the past and the future. Why is it that we don't have any historian being on a plenary talking about, you know, colonization, for example, how it used to be, how we've done it, and what are we meant to be doing moving forward with the Moon Village, for example? Why is it that we don't have that kind of, you know, plurality on the table as well, not just, you know, from the scientific perspective?
And Nelly, how do you think that you can help the scientific community to really apply critical thinking in the context that we use it? And maybe you can explain that a little bit to the audience, because I did have a few people from the scientific community ask me that very simple question: what is critical thinking, and how can we help them to apply it?
I mean, I guess the answer will be, first of all, to open up your platform. So if you're running a committee, or if you're, you know, going to be starting a session and writing a session proposal and so forth, to actually like come up with a proposal that will involve other people from different background than yours, from different area of interest. And I think I've been, you know, in a way, I've been quite lucky in the sense that, you know, it's going to be my 7th IAC, right? Now, like the 7 years that I'm going in all these conferences. And I think, you know, I've seen the evolution where there is people, Bernard, I'm not going to like, you know, I don't like in panels when they are all nice with each other, by the way, but I must say that you've been very instrumental in supporting, you know, people that don't always agree with you to come and be a part of committees at the Astronautical Federation. But there is, you know, the CEOC committee as well, the Space Education and Outreach Committee, who does really interesting work on trying to bring, especially, you know, like artists, designers, historians, people, teachers, people that come from all different disciplines into the, you know, a very privileged place that is the Astronautical Congress.
Thank
So
you.
just open the door, I guess.
Yeah, as we have had the door open for us. Bernard, you are quite a tour de force. You wear so many hats and are a real inspiration for in regard to all things moon. So tell us a little bit about, you're here specifically in the context of the Moon Village to talk a little bit about that, but of course you can talk a bit wider. Tell us about that.
Well, I'm going to improvise to the slide. That's a free human. You will always love the moon, because the moon is your mirror. In the moon, you can see your own sorrows. But also the moon is what has inspired us when we are kids. And actually I love this image because we were looking at the moon, we built our little telescopes. Last week with Anna Sitnikova, which in fact should present our Moon Gallery project, we were putting a telescope in the center of Prague city. And it's such a great feeling to have those people that had never seen the moon through a telescope and looking at this. Wow. And okay, we feel so expert because I know the geography of the moon, because I know the names of some of these places. I know a place where Apollo 11 is. You can see it's just near the Terminator here. There's also another view where I can show where my spacecraft will land. And so I've been involved in being an astronomer, studying the moon, studying Mars, and also in trying to work out the other part of astrobiology, which is how is the evolution of life? What is the future of life? Huh? You mentioned it a bit. And so we put some experiment in space to see how organic molecules, how living forms survive. And we found that some of them survive quite well. And we put those in a little tray that we exposed on the space station or in another capsule. And 10 years ago, while I was working with some artists to develop a platform to bridge between art and space, we call it Art Moon Mars, I thought, oh, why don't we put some artifacts that would be done by artists on some of these trays. And that's how I came up with this concept of Moon Gallery. And then I was joined by some brilliant young curator, Anna Sinikova, Lisa Glukova, where we have made it happen. So we are trying now to send 100 pieces of art to the moon within 2022. And it costs only $1 million per kilo. So please, can you contribute? The website is moongallery.eu. But we say, okay, maybe we are not going to manage with all the crowdsourcing of the world, so we are going to make it small. So our gallery is just 10 by 10 centimeter. And each artist or scientist or whatever what concept you would like to send, has 1 cubic centimeter to provide. And we are trying to help artists to send, okay, what they would think as a sculpture, as a text, artifact, or technology to the moon. So we have organized a number of events. And so Anna and Lisa are curating these, are collecting ideas. There is a call for showing this Moon Gallery elements. So we did one at ESTEC, our space center. We did one in Milano Design Week, last week in Prague. And the next step, we are doing, we also did one on the glacier in Switzerland. You know, we go higher and higher. Next time, we go even higher. We are going to show this exhibition at the summit of Hawaii, almost the closest to the moon that we could do from the Pacific. And in a few years, we plan to gather this artwork and send it to the moon. So there are some examples of entries for this Moon Gallery. So this is the container, but you have seen some example of, or maybe just a few pieces before. Okay, this is one. That's okay, piece of intellect. One artist wanted to put her hair to the moon. One wanted to send a picture of herself naked that she put in little pieces to fit in a cubic centimeter. This is an allegory of the relation between the Earth and the moon, the interior of the moon. You have one piece which is a human spirit. One is an origami that deploys. So you have all the diversity, the plurality of us we listen to the moon. So I think that, and even with critical, not only thinking, critical action, which is what I think that we need, but that's, we want to show.
You're so perfect. You're so perfect, Bernard, like we don't even know what to say anymore.
No, because it's an ongoing process. It's still open for you. You can still contribute.
I think
maybe we should send you to the moon directly.
I think this is interesting because it's open not just to artists. It's open to scientists and anybody who thinks that there's something valuable to put in there, and that's an exchange. I think there is a lot of debate in the art-science collaboration world that really says, is it truly a collaboration? Because as an artist in residence at European Space Agency, when I arrived, there was this expectation that I would go and talk to scientists, I would get some data, I would go away and make some art, and I was like, no, no, no. And I think, Satraka, you've had a similar experience where actually to try to create a two-way exchange or try to get the scientists involved in the art side as well and draw value and learn that in that direction, it's quite difficult, and it takes work and effort from the scientific community as well. It's not just as simple as opening the doors. It does take as much effort as it takes for anyone to learn and for anyone to learn new skills. I want to touch briefly on a 2006 study group which examined the role of space architecture, and it had an arts group module in it. And in that report, there was 4 recommendations that were made to the IAA and the IAF which were accepted and endorsed. One of those was integrating artists into space project teams from the earliest phase of a project life cycle. The second was establishing a paradigm for art utilized in human space projects that focuses on art as a core factor in enabling mission success rather than an aesthetic afterthought. Developing process templates for human space project teams to identify and select artists, and also certification curricula to be established by universities and colleges to facilitate adequate specialized training of artists desiring to participate in human spaceflight projects. Now, this recommendation was made over 10 years ago. Panel, what are the problems that, if anyone here wanted to help realize those four recommendations as part of the IAF, how could they go about it? What are the challenges they're going to face? Did you get?
Okay, so this recommendation.
So these recommendations relate to involving.
Do you have them on the screen, maybe?
I don't, I'm afraid, but I'll just remind you quickly. Involving artists in project teams early on.
Who is against?
Developing
Approved.
process. Yeah. So creating certification curricula. So getting universities or colleges to have space modules in them. Yeah. Nelly, you can maybe answer that because you have a space. You have a university. Do you have a space module?
I mean, it's not really presented as a space module, but it is. I mean, they learn. I mean, Joseph, maybe you want to tell a few words about the kind of the workshop that you set up at the University of the Underground a while back with an architect, a space architect called Barbara Imhoff. So Joseph Popper here was teaching a class actually on analogs and and how to even think about analogs with the students. Do you want to say a few words about it?
I think you just said it for me. Hello?
No, we can see you.
Yeah.
Oh. So for the workshop I ran with Barbara Imhoff, who's also an attendee at the conference, we invited the students to build their own Mars mission simulation. So we got them to not only design certain built environments that could simulate different missions on Mars, but also enabled them to realize them at one-to-one scale out of simple materials such as cardboard and other simple materials. And then from there, we proceeded to run actual simulations, including a time delay, separating a Earth mission control in one part of the university to people acting out EVAs on the surface, for instance. So it was a way of not only engaging students in the realities of enacting a Mars mission in terms of, say, team cooperation and organization, but also starting to generate experiences for themselves of their own making. So this was
we have a various examples where we integrated space into curriculum. For instance, in international space universities, they have they invite artists, they do some work. At the Free University in Amsterdam, when I'm professor, we developed a space module. We have a work at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts where we included a space challenge to the art students. So they develop projects inspired by space. Sometimes also I even enclose together artists and engineers for 2 weeks in the middle of the moon base, and they learn to work together. And that's something that maybe give you also inspiration how they have to use each other's skill.
Thank you. And we're kind of coming to the end of time. So I want to, well, not to the end of all time, but to the end of the time of the GNF, the session. So I'd like to open up questions to the audience. If you'd like to ask any questions to the panelists, and also we might ask you some questions too, because it's a little bit interactive. Does anyone like to ask anything?
I have a question for Citraca. Is that the correct pronunciation of your name?
Yeah.
When I saw the mask you showed in the picture, I couldn't help but think of the work of the Brazilian artist Licia Clark. I don't know if you're familiar with her work.
Sorry, I mean,
when I saw the mask,
facing...
Sorry, when I saw the mask
that you
showed,
yeah.
I thought of the work of the Brazilian artist Licia Clark. Who was active in the 60s and 70s in Brazil and also in Paris. And what I thought was interesting, because you said one of the problems in space is how to connect with other people. And she specifically developed this kind of addenda for people to wear and to kind of create connections with each other, like transform the way they connect to re-signify that connection. I don't know if that's, because you didn't go into the use of your mask, but I was a little bit interested, how was the mask used, and do you at all know about her work or connect with what she did?
Yeah, well, I mean, I probably missed a lot of things because I'm not really good at explaining thoroughly what the projects are often. But this isn't a mask that I made. So this is a mask, there is this helmet that's been built by one of the students at the Art and Design College in Geneva called HEAD. So what we asked them to do was literally use the helmet as like the most kind of symbolic object or artifacts of space exploration, to use the helmet and design their own as a way of characterizing the kind of like ideals and individuals that would be inhabiting space in their own imagination. And so it's about them imagining what kind of like concerns and ideas and eventually values would be actually taken and conveyed into a space future. So that is actually a helmet from this particular student was actually interested in making a helmet about a very investigative like journalists and how we would need eventually like, I don't know, some sort of like bordering with whistleblower on a moon base, et cetera, et cetera. So it all comes from stories and fictions that are written by the students.
So we need to wrap up. Should we do one more question, or do we want to do a question from the panel to the audience? Do we have one more question from the audience? And then we'll finish.
I mean, you could take a woman question maybe, no? Just, yeah, over there, down there.
Okay.
Maybe let's take both, so you can say yours.
Okay, cool.
So maybe say both questions, and then we can answer.
Yeah, if we actually do develop and we actually go to the moon and create a moon village, how do you see culture, like human culture and like human society developing there, and like just expanding through the solar system? Like how do you picture our humans developing culture and society in these exterior places?
I can't hear any of that, can you? Because it's very muffled. I think we can't hear very well.
Okay. How do you see like culture and society developing in like moon villages and like solar systems societies?
How do we see
Like,
cultural
how do you see society developing, like not outside of the human world, outside of the Earth? Like,
well, I think this is, I mean, if you don't mind, I think this is, how do we see culture developing outside of the Earth?
yeah, exactly.
Okay. And then is
there
there one more question? We can answer at the same time because we need to be very quick.
Okay, can you hear? Okay.
Yeah, hold the mic close to your mouth.
What kind of influence have you been able to have in terms of any policy for the UN or the IAF in terms of culture and space?
What kind of policy are we going to have in terms of
what
culturalizing?
kind of influence have you been able to have as a group, as ITACCUS group? How are you received in terms of the UN or IAF or any?
What influences have we been able to have? Bernard, this might be, you guys might have a better question because you've been longer than me.
Okay, well, I think that I could answer to both. New culture and what is our influence. We are going to develop. We are going to move out this planet. So in 2014, for example, there will be 100 people on the moon. We'll have the first baby born on the moon. We'll have to build a school. We'll develop also a new culture based on what we have inherited from all the continents. And that's how also we can shape a bit our influence. That it should
Really
be not
easy.
only a world dominated by engineers or by financial profit, by all the values that shape humanity.
Thank you, Bernard. I think also the ITACCUS works by having members who represent organizations. So those organizations with projects, so those individual projects are working away, like Nelly's, like these guys. So it works by infiltrating those organizations and changing from the inside's attitudes. And I think at this stage, that was the main, up until now, this has really been the main kind of objective, is to get that door opened and to get them listening and get them to see the value. And I think at this time now, the space organizations really do see the value, but the next challenge, I think, is really getting them to understand how to make that work, like how to actually integrate it in a much more meaningful way and a way that they can justify putting money against it and actually bringing artists into space, because it's a very, very difficult thing to do. And then I think in terms of, your question was the policy, was it? And I think that's also a very good question, because we talk about the space industry at the moment thinks that space culture means bringing human culture to space. But actually, space is going to have its own evolution of culture, and that means you're going to need cultural practitioners in space, because otherwise you're not going to have the experts up there who will be able to help facilitate that.
Can I just say as well that we have a session on space culture here at the IAC. That's the session E1.9, which is on Friday at 1:30. Friday at 1:30, Space Culture E1.9, and we will be discussing exactly that. Like, we will be discussing what culture we might want to bring or even think about when we develop it.
Perfect.
And if you want to make a difference, join the ITACCUS committee on a Thursday at 5 o'clock in room 146. You can come as an observer and eventually make also a suggestion of what we could do within this committee on social-cultural utilization of space.
But I feel that with this question that you ask about, like, impact on, you know, how, like, I think this is a key issue, because ultimately when you think in terms of, like, scientific data, then, you know, cultural support or cultural impact is going to have to be seen on data. So how many people came to an exhibition as opposed to whether or not the exhibition was effective, right? And I think this is something that slowly is, you know, everybody, all of us are trying to kind of like explain to space agencies, not so much in terms of the numbers that you would see the impact of, you know, of an artist or someone who is going to start bringing some critical thoughts into your institution, but it might just be into, you know, in the next 5-10 years, you will have like a sort of a platform that is going to be completely independent and that would be able to like produce some, you know, some cultural content, but some knowledge and so forth. So it's like our understanding of what is meaningful is different in general from the one of the stakeholders, and that's a big issue.
And I think the culturalization of space really is about who has access to it and who can get involved, which is why we're trying to open that pathway more now. So there's so much to say, and there's so much we didn't touch on. And if you want to come and talk, come and find us. We love answering questions. And I've got 2 microphones, and I'll keep with this one. And I think this really concludes the session for Alive in Space GNF. Thank you for holding with us at the beginning when it was a little bit chaotic, but that's a little bit our style. Please can you join me in thanking our incredible and generous panelists, Citraka, Michael, Nelly, and Bernard. Thank you so much.
Well done, Aoife.
Thank you again for the IAF and the IAC
Joseph.
for giving us this time with you. And most of all, thank you for joining us and taking part. From ITACCUS, I hope that you're feeling inspired and alive a little bit, and come and talk to us. If you're interested in actioning any of the recommendations that I mentioned, I did blow through them very quickly so you can find out more. And we hope we can work together in our mission to help human culture develop in space. And the last thing I think we need to do is take a photo. Bernard, yes? Everybody, if you want to join us next to the stage, then we'll take a group photo of the session. We can all fit in the picture, so come. Come join us.
Let's be alive. This is space. So this is your last chance to
Do you want to join, Edward?
Okay, we can do it.
Come.
Okay.
Yeah, come up and take a photo with us.
If you like me, come, and if you don't, also.
Just come and stand at the front with us. Thank you. We want you to. Thank you. Would you take a picture for us? Maybe? Thank you.
So from now on, you are declared friends of the committee on social cultural utilization of space. That's a picture to document it. Thank you. You have to make the mention.
Thank you so much, everyone.